Alright, so we've done a great job so far. We're almost completed with our mockup here. We got a couple more pages up here to design, and then we're good to go in terms of our mobile mockups. We can then move forward with exporting and sharing it with our colleagues and team members. Now, before we move on to completing these pages, I wanted to show you some of the effects that XD has to offer and how they work on objects and images and so on. And to do that, in the login page, I want to go ahead and just zoom in just on there. We have this little status bar here, of course, that we put together in the previous lectures. So this status bar in this page comes with the background over here, which is what we want, because there's this image here, and if we didn't have this background, it would kind of interfere, or this clock over here would kind of interfere with this image. So we don't want that, and that's why we want this background here. Now, one of the cool effects that you can apply on a page like this or on a status bar like this is to apply what's called a background blur. So XD has two different types of blurs that it offers, one of them being background blur, the other one being object blur, and we're going to explore both of them in this lecture here. The first one I want to explore is a background blur, which applies to the status bar. So let's go ahead and select the status bar, and instead of selecting the whole thing, let's double click to only select the BG or the background layer over here. So make sure in your layers panel you only have that background layer selected. Once you have that BG layer selected, then go ahead and enable background blur. Now, if right here it says object blur for you, go ahead and change it to background blur instead, and then go ahead and enable it. So there's three properties here that we can edit. The first one is how strong our blur is. So the higher the number we set over here, the more blur will be applied. Right now, we're not seeing much because of the fact that the transparency of this background layer is at 100%. As we make it less transparent, you'll see that the blur will be applied and what it will look like. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and bring the transparency of this down. So now if you look at the top, you can kind of see the blur. So right now, my background doesn't even have a color anymore. It's just a blur. And if I select it again and lower the blur, you can see it gets less and less blurry. And if I make it higher, it will get more and more blurry. So what this is doing essentially is it's taking that background layer and making anything underneath it and adding a blur to anything underneath it. And that's what the background blur does. Now, this option over here, if I go ahead and bring it down, it will make this background layer darker, and vice versa. If I go the other way, it will go ahead and make it more and more lighter. But it's kind of what we want in this case, so that we create enough contrast so the user can see the status bar. So why don't we put this at 25 with the background blur itself being at 15, I think would look good. Now, if you look at it from a little bit more zoomed out, you'll see that looks pretty good. Before we move on, I also want to show you how object blur works. So if I select this logo over here, if we go ahead and instead of background blur, select object blur and go ahead and enable that right here, what will happen is that XD will go ahead and blur just that layer itself. So we're not blurring anything underneath it, we're blurring the logo itself. And so, of course, with this, you can create some sort of cool effects if you really like. So just as an example, you could do something like this where you create maybe one kind of a background for the logo, maybe make it a little bit larger, and then go ahead and, for example, duplicate it. And this one, you can remove the blur and make it a little bit smaller. You can get really creative and create stuff like that with the object blur, and you can even go ahead and make it less visible, so it's not fully transparent. Something like that could look cool, but again, that's really up to you and how creative you want to get to with your blurs. I'm just going to go ahead and just Command Z to undo that a bunch of times. I don't really want that there. Just wanted to show you what object blur has to offer. Now, that effect that we created for the logo kind of looked like a shadow. So what we're going to do in the next lecture is come back and learn how we can actually create shadows for our objects in XD.